Well, I think I remember to turn the mic on this time. Uh, I was in Arab, Alabama. There is such a place called Arab, Alabama. It's supposed to be Arad, Alabama, and they transposed the last letter. They told the postmaster, "You misspelled our name." He said, "Get over it." So it was like in the early 1900s. So it's Arab, Alabama, not Arad, Alabama. And I was late, almost late. I misfigured the idiot factor on the parkway. I walk in the back door, and the deacon in charge of microphones and such was standing back there sweating bullets. And it wasn't in the days when you had the Garth Brooks headset, the starter set. And so he gave me this little box with a clip. I walked to the front of the building, clipped it to my tie, looked at it, had one button, said no. And I said, well, I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I'm not going to turn it to no. I said, I don't know how to work that. All it says is no. Somebody said, turn it over. It'll say on. So if there's ever any problems with technology, it's my fault. I'm the guy doing that. I got to spend the afternoon with Don and Linda. Lynn, Lynn, okay, with Don and Lynn, and then Matt and Heather let me borrow Matt, and we took a tour of the property, and really had a nice afternoon. And then I got to spend some time with the children as they ate ice cream and learned a lot of stuff about soccer and basketball. So thank you guys for being gracious host and letting me come and do these lessons for you. We're going to get into a discussion of dependence to independence. We'll review a little bit of stuff from this morning, but I did want to start out with a passage in Deuteronomy. It's time to take the second generation of Israel and bring them into the covenant of God. It's time for the next generation, and that's what raising spiritually self-reliant children is. It's so for the church to self-propagate, and so that the church we have today will look the same tomorrow. And it doesn't, they say a family-owned business dies in 3 generations. And, just look around at the family farms, at least in Huntsville, that are being turned into apartment buildings. The third generation afterwards kind of loses things. So how do you keep continuity in the church? How do we raise children who are spiritually self-reliant? It's interesting that these commands came through Moses. If you have your Bibles, look at Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 starts with a very famous passage. The Hebrews called it Shema, because the first word in Hebrew is hear. Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Of these words which I command you today, they shall be in your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets to your eyes. You shall write them on your doorpost and on your gates. God's telling these people through Moses, hey, it's time to have your children have a spiritual relationship with me. And the first thing he tells the parents is these laws that I give you, they got to be on your hearts. So as moms and dads, as grandparents, as uncles, as mentors, as adults in the church, if we want to raise spiritually self-reliant children, we've got to have ownership first. It's not do as I say, not do as I do, but they've got to come from our heart. And then you'll notice that what he tells these people is the covenant relationship, this relationship you have with God, is you're creating a spiritual subculture in your home. Now, that may be a foreign term to you. Anybody struggle with family devos at your house? This means yes. This means no. This means you're not voting, right? We say, okay, we need to be spiritual in our home, so let's have a family devo. And so everybody gets in, dad stands up and goes, welcome to family devo. We should probably make announcements that the dog needs to be fed. The trash needs to go to the, and we turn what we do in our family devotion, and that's what it is. It's a devotion to God. That's not an activity. That's an adjective. Our family devotion to God becomes a miniature worship service. Well, that's not what the Bible here says. He said, see, you bind these things in your heart and they become part of your subculture so that when you're with your children, you talk about spiritual things as you're walking, as you're lying down, as you're rising up. They're on your gate, they're on your fence, they're on your t-shirt, they're on your ball cap, they're on your bracelet. Church is not something that is compartmentalized. It's not something we only do on Sundays and Wednesdays. I learned this, by the way, from a 15-year-old kid named Chad Smith. Chad is no longer a 15-year-old kid. He's a retired SWAT officer, lives just north of here near West Dyersburg. He bought a little farm and a pond, and he retired from our police department. But he was 15 years old. He and I were on the same retreat together. I was the guest speaker. Now, as a guest speaker, you go through these phases. When you're my age now and you pull into a retreat center, they say, Brother Jones, we have an air-conditioned cabin for you and a soft mattress. When you're a younger youth minister, you pull up and go, Brother Jones, you can bunk with the boys. That's a nightmare. Go stay a weekend in a room full of teenage boys you don't know. Get a top bunk in the corner, like a fatal funnel. They can only come in from one direction. I always carry a knife to camp. I'm not supposed to, but I do. Usually a Bowie knife. And so I go in, all these kids are staring at you. You put it on the top bunk. You climb on the top bunk. You pull this knife out. That gets their attention. You tie it upside down on a rafter so that it hangs handle down. You lay down, you raise it, and you put your hand on it. You lay down, you raise it, put your hand on it. They won't mess with you at night. Then you go, hey, if you boys will be real quiet tonight, I probably won't have a flashback. Crickets. They don't steal your underwear. They don't mess with your socks. They don't throw water balloons at you. They will leave you alone. So I go set up camp. I'm here, do my little knife thing, laying down. Somewhere around midnight, I hear this. Hey, Lonzo. Chad, my nickname's Lonzo. If I look over the edge of the bed, they may grab you. I go, what? I got a question. What's your question? What's your favorite Bible verse? What? Well, I usually ask everybody I meet, and what's your favorite Bible verse? So I crawl off this bunk, and I turn on my flashlight, and I sit on this concrete floor with dirt on it, and a light comes on over here, and a light comes on over here, and a light comes on, and these guys, and we sit in the floor, and we talk about the Bible the same way you talk about NASCAR or deer hunting or SEC football. Conversational spirituality. We didn't go, okay, it's time for the boys' cabin devo. He goes, hey, man, what's your favorite Bible verse? You get in your car and you drive home. Don't ask your kids, what did you learn in class today? Because what they'll tell you, nothing. What'd you do? Nothing. You and your husband talk about what you learned in Bible class. And that little voice in the back seat will go, well, in my class, we learned about Noah. And you make it conversational to talk about spiritual things. What did I learn from the preacher's lesson today? What did you learn from what the elders said today? What did you learn from this? What was your favorite song today? And you and your husband talk about it as you're driving, as you're walking, as you're lying down, as you're getting up. You wear these things on your T-shirt, on your bracelet, and your ball cap, and your kids will understand that church, that spirituality is something that permeates our existence. I can drive through Tennessee and see that flag in your yard with that color I won't mention in the letter T there. I was speaking at Old Hickory. I said, I didn't know there was so many Texas fans here. They nearly ran me out of the building. But I like to offend football fans. It's just my thing. But I can walk in and tell there's Alabama, there's Auburn, there's Tennessee, there's Mississippi, there's Georgia, whatever. I've got a video on my phone, my grandson, he's 2 years old, going, go Dogs, in that southern accent. Could I walk into your house and tell that you went to church? Can I spend a few minutes talking to your kid and find out that what their life is full of is spiritual things? Is it that we push academics and athletics, or is it we teach our children that your academics and your athletics are a way that you serve God? I think you'll find that's a biblical pattern for evangelism, that the things that we're gifted at, we use as vehicles to serve other people. That's why we have the gifts that we have. So God tells Moses, hey, instead of turning these kids over to the experts, hey, have all the children line up and let Moses teach them. Was there anybody more qualified than Moses to teach people? God says of Moses, he's a friend I speak to face. And yet when it comes time to take the second generation of Israel and turn them into people of God, it wasn't on Moses, it was on their parents. Look, if you will, at Luke chapter 2. And everybody knows Luke chapter 2, and you can quote verse 52. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and in favor with man. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, favor with God, favor with man. He grew intellectually. He grew physically, he grew socially, and he grew spiritually after he left the temple. See, he's in the temple. He's with the experts. He's with the guys from out of town with a briefcase. And he goes home with an obscure Jewish carpenter and, for all practical purposes, a 22-year-old teenage girl. And when he gets home with those people, not the priests, not the scribe, not the Pharisees, not the Levites, with mom and dad, he grows in wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with man. God's design is not for the school to raise your children. God's design is not for the church to raise your children. Your youth ministry program, your children's ministry program here, that is a supplement for parenting, not a substitute. And you should be involved in a family-based ministry so that when you lie down and when you walk and it's on your gait and it's on your bracelet, it's on your T-shirt and it's on your ball cap. And just incidentally, in this really cool story of Luke chapter 2, Luke 2:41, and his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. Now, when he was 12 years old, he went to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. And when they had finished the days, as they returned, the boy Jesus lingered behind in Jerusalem. And Joseph and his mother did not know it. You lost the Messiah. You had one job, okay? But supposing him to be in the company, they went 3 days' journey and sought him among their relatives and acquaintances. And so when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem seeking him. So now it was after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And everybody who heard him was astonished at his understanding and his answers. And so when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously." And Jesus said, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" But they did not understand the statement which he spoke to them. Jesus is 12 years old, and they take him to Jerusalem, and he's going to do probably what we would call bar mitzvah. Bar means the son of, mitzvah is the covenant. As a 12-year-old boy, he is going to assume responsibility for his relationship to God. It's no longer, I'm going to obey the covenant because my parents make me. I'm going to have a direct responsibility to God for the covenant. Bar mitzvah, I'm going to become a son of the covenant. Now, in their culture, becoming a son of the covenant was also a sign of manhood. And so what do you ask every little boy when he becomes a man? What are you going to do for a job? What does every boy say? Every little Jewish boy, anyway, I will be about my Father's business. When he says that, they're thinking carpenter shop. But that's not what he's thinking. So they go out of town and they lose him. And they come back into town, and this could either be 3 days or 5 days. You've got a missing kid in Jerusalem. Now, if you've got a missing kid in Jerusalem, where would you look for him? You go right outside the southern entrance of the temple, and you go to the western wall. There's a huge staircase there with a giant arc called the Way of the Cheesemongers. If I'm a 12-year-old boy, I'm climbing that column, and I'm going to find out what a cheesemonger is. You go to the back side of the temple. You go out the northeastern side before you go into the Kidron Valley. You got a Roman fortress called the Fortress Antonio. And the Roman soldiers were there. There was a garrison house there, and they would probably be out there marching or doing martial arts or practicing. And if I'm a 12-year-old boy, I'm going to watch some of that. You go down to the Kidron Valley and climb up into the Mount of Olives, the same path that King David walked when Absalom rebelled against him. As a 12-year-old boy, I'm going to do that too. The last place you look for a 12-year-old boy is in the temple, sitting and talking rationally and even amazingly with the scribes and the lawyers and the doctors. So they walk in, and Jesus is sitting here, and he's asking and answering questions, and he's doing a good job of it. And they're so upset that they've lost their son that Mary, a little Jewish girl, speaks out loud in temple. That's not a formal temple worship service, but she's in the temple confines, and she speaks out loud. She's so upset that she finally finds you. We've sought you anxiously. Your father and I have sought you. Have you ever noticed when your parents are upset, they blame the other one? Your dad's losing his, but why are you talking, Mary? Okay, Mary's the one who's upset. My brother and I was a youth minister in Anniston, Alabama, and he was attending the same congregation on a break from college. We had a lady that lived in DeArmonville, Alabama. If you don't know where DeArmonville, Alabama, it's where God stood when he made the South. Nobody knows where it is. It's just got a footprint there. I mean, you have to head toward town to hunt. Well, she brings this girl with her to church who had just moved there from California. A girl named Leslie Head. Neat young lady, cool. Well, my brother and I said, hey, we're having a youth devotional after church. We're going to eat snacks and sing and stay with us. And so she stayed and went to the Devo. And then it comes time to take her home. And she can't remember where she lives. She's been in Alabama 2 weeks from California. There's no cell phones, people. There's no GPS. You can't ask Siri nothing because she don't exist. If you make a phone call, you got to find one hanging in a booth, and you got to feed it money. And you can't just go, well, Siri called Pam Butterworth. We're lost. This girl's lost. We're trying to find out where she is. Eventually, we get contact with Miss Butterworth, and we get this girl home. And at midnight, the Jones boys sashay into the living room. My dad is still up, hadn't changed clothes. He said, you boys are late. I said, Dad, she couldn't remember where she lived. He said, you can do better than that. And then he said, your mother is worried, sick about you. And I said, well, why ain't she up? And don't ask that question. That is not the question. You ask my dad, okay? Put 20 pounds on me and a crew cut, and you've got my dad, all right? And that's not so she said, your father and I have been anxiously worried about you. And listen to what Jesus says. Why are you worried? You brought me down here. You made me put on my best robe. I had to stand in front of these people and say, I'm a son of the covenant, and now I'm going to do a job. I'm doing my job. I meant what I said. What did you mean? And his parents did not understand the words he spoke to them. In this situation, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, who's right? Who has a clue? Who has accurate understanding of who he is and what he's supposed to be doing? Jesus or his parents? Your answer is Jesus. And he went with them and was subject unto them. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with man. Young people, your parents don't have to have a degree in psychology. Your parents don't have to have more understanding than you. Your parents don't have to be smarter than you. Your job is simply to obey your parents. And mom and dad, you don't ever have to look at yourself and say, I'm not qualified to be a parent. God said you're qualified to be a parent when he let you be parents. Now, you may have to do some practice. You may have to do some work. But, you know, kids often think, oh, my parents can't even operate a cell phone. How dumb are they? Well, Jesus knew who he was supposed to be. And for the next 18 years, because social convention said you can't be a priest till you're 30 and you can't be a rabbi till you're 30, he lived in that carpenter shop for 18 years. Why? Because it was his job as a son of God and son of man, to be submissive to his parents. And even though he had better knowledge, he obeyed them. And you want to have a hassle-free adolescence? Obey your parents. Do what your parents ask you to do when they ask you to do it the first time, and you'll have a stress-free existence. And by the way, the more they can trust you, the more they will give you freedom. The least they can trust you, the least they'll give you freedom, because we measure trust with a simple metric that's called selfishness. When you act selfish, I don't trust you. When you're not selfish, I do trust you. And inherently, because teenagers and young people are self-absorbed and you're supposed to be egocentric as part of what you're doing, everything you ask seems reasonable to you but sounds selfish to us. My curfew needs to be 30. My curfew needs to be 12 o'clock. I need an iPhone 37. I want the keys to the Mercedes. You think that's normal and reasonable because you're a wonderful person. Your parents hear, this kid's selfish. And so every time you approach them with something that sounds selfish, their default answer is always no. And they say no because what you ask and the way you ask sounds selfish to them. And you want to fix some of that, quit being selfish, and learn to be submissive. Okay, so that's kind of my preamble on how to understand that your job is to create a spiritual atmosphere in your house. And that spiritual atmosphere in your house also comes from the idea that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor of God and favor of man after he left the experts in the temple and went home with his parents. And his parents weren't experts, but they were his parents. And his job was to be submissive to them. And young people, your job is to be submissive as well. All right. Back to what we were doing this morning. Basically, your job in raising spiritually self-reliant children is to move them from dependence to independence. And you remember this chart where you have the top part is dependence and the bottom part is independence. And from birth to adulthood, you have 100% dependence. You have 0% independence. And as you grow older, your dependence decreases and your independence increases. And that's the normal way of things. You have a safe place to operate from, and you move out and you experience the world. You have successes and failures, and then you go back. And you move further out and move further back. And you keep doing this until at some point you go far enough you don't have to come back. And that's learning your morals, that's learning your rules, that's learning the things that we talked about as far as setting parameters. Our job as dads and moms is to encourage, comfort, and urge. We encourage you, getting you out of your comfort zone, getting away from the safe base. Teach you to do things that make you anxious. Teach you to do things that are hard. Teach you not to quit. Then we comfort you when you do something hard and you fail, or you get a disappointment, or you have a tragedy, or you just have an emotional breakdown. We use active listening skills and emotion coaches. We encourage, we comfort. And then urge is the idea of discipline. And so when we talked about encourage, comfort, and urge, we mainly were talking about what happens to teenagers, because teenagers start using that emotional brain. And it's really our job as mom and dads, when they have as much dependence as they do independence, to kind of massage this. You're a kid and an adult, you're an adult and a kid. And I've got to work at it so you survive this period where you've got an adult body but a child's impulses, that you don't make a mistake that's life altering. And again, parents, you're not successful or failure based on what your kids do. You're successful or failure based on how you respond to what your kids do. Your job is to put boundaries, not control them, but put boundaries in their life. And they may get off the reservation and they may get in trouble. But if they do, it's because they climbed over, they climbed under, or they climbed around a barrier you set for them. If you set no barriers, then you're culpable. If you set barriers and they break them, that's on them, not on you. And so once you start talking about moving from dependence to independence, we're essentially going to talk about the idea of making our children self-reliant adults, so that their self-reliance involves the significant 7. Now, we talked about if you encourage your children, you fulfill 2 of the perceptions. You fulfill the perception of I'm capable and I'm significant. And then when you discipline your children, you fulfill the 3rd of those, and that is my choices affect my outcomes. So if you're, and by the way, they have these slides, and if you want copies of them, they'll probably give them to you, but if you want to take notes, cool too. But the significant 7 basically boils down to you have 3 perceptions, mindsets that children have to be spiritually self-reliant. And then you have 3 skills or 4 skills. The perceptions are I'm capable, I'm significant, and I can influence what happens to me. Basically, those are the things where children come from your home learning self-reliance. They've gone from dependence to independence. They've experienced things. They've experimented. You've let them go out with a safety net to fall back on, and learning that they can do some things. And so when they learn those things, they say, I tried this and it worked. I'm capable. Self-esteem comes from confidence. Confidence comes from competence. You don't learn competence unless you learn how to do something, and you can't learn how to do something without failing at it first. And so they learn I'm capable. Then they learn I'm significant. I make a contribution to my home. I make a contribution to my friendships. I have some accountability for why nobody wants to play with me. I have some accountability to why my grades aren't doing what they're doing. I can make some things happen because I'm part of a contributing part of a system that I'm in. So I help with chores. I learn how to do things. I contribute to the family. And then I can influence what happens to me. If you make good choices, typically good things will happen. If you make bad choices, typically bad things will happen. When you're talking about disciplining children, it's super, super important to have them understand that it's not about me controlling you, but about you controlling you. And I put the burden of control on you, not on me. I can't make you do anything. I just can't. This is ceaseless. You're going to eat one more chicken nugget, but you can't make a kid eat a chicken nugget. If he's got more willpower than you do, he won't eat that chicken. And you can put him to sleep and put it, but they'll call somebody if you do that. But that's not the same as him eating the chicken nugget. So what you have to do is change that says, I'm going to let you reevaluate your choices. Now, when I grew up, and Dad said, clean the room or take out the trash, you cleaned the room and took out the trash. And if you didn't, your life would be altered. Some kids respond well to that. Some kids don't. Some kids are stubborn enough to say, okay, give me my 3 licks. I knew they'd send me home if I fought at school. If you fight at school, they'll send you home for 3 days. But I got this guy who's bullying me every single day. Well, I'm not going to live that way the rest of my life. I'll take my 3 days. And he won't bully me anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's a valid thing you should do. I'm just saying from my checkered past, I was willing to take the punishment to do the thing I wanted to do. And a lot of times kids say, I'm gonna be in control. I don't care what you take away from me. I don't care what you do. Because we tend to make our limits punitive or vindictive. And our limits can't be punitive or vindictive. Our limits have to be, I'm going to change the way I respond to your behavior. Does that make sense? So, if for instance, I were to be, and by the way, we only had one daughter, okay? And I know that having just one kid is like having a glorified pet. I get that. You got a really smart pet at your house if you don't have, but I worked with lots of children as a youth minister in private practice. And in one summer, we fostered 2 kids. Jackie came home from school just nearly in tears. She said, I've got a little boy in the 7th grade. He said he won't be back after spring break. His mom's going to be trained in the military, and he's got to move to Ohio to live with some uncle he doesn't know. She said, my heart believes that this boy goes to Ohio, he dies. Young African-American male. Jack said, we just can't let him go. And so we meet with the mom and say, hey, while you're in basic training and you're at AIT, we're willing to keep this kid. Well, she met with some of the police officers that she knew that knew me, and she vetted Jackie. And so we agreed that for 18 weeks, we would keep this young man, a great young man. Didn't realize he came with a 7-year-old brother who was demon possessed. And I mean, it just a very, very unique kid. Love him to death. Jay calls me every year at Father's Day. Very first night, Mom brings him to our house on Wednesday morning. She ships out to basic training. There at our house, we're going to go eat out and go to Bible class. We walk into a Captain D's. We're at the Captain D's, and the little guy is standing at the counter and won't order. He's enjoying all the attention that he's getting, and he just won't order. So Jackie says, 3 pieces of fish, some hush puppies, and a Coke. And we shuffle through the line, and we sit at the table. He goes, this is not what I want. And Jackie said, well, you wouldn't order, so I just ordered you some food. So, well, I'm not going to eat it. Well, that's fine. You don't have to eat it. We'll eat when we get home. Clears the table. Lays down in the floor and begins to thrash. I'm a white dude in Huntsville, Alabama. I got a little African-American boy laying in the floor flopping. I'm about to put hands on him. I suspect I'm going to be on CNN before I stand up in a chair. May I have your attention, please? They don't listen. I said, if you can hear my voice, clap one time. You hear my voice, clap twice. Everybody, hey, listen, this is my kid. I'm fostering him this summer. So when I drag him out of here, I'm not kidnapping him, and he's not being abused. Now, when we get to the truck, that may change. But right now, this is my, out we go. Put him in the truck. He starts banging on the windshield, banging on the seat. I say, you see my watch on my phone? I'm going to time how long it takes you to calm down. And however long it takes, you will pay me those minutes back in my life. Go. And 22 minutes later, he ran out of juice. We went to church, had a great time. He made some new friends. He got to color in Mr. Wanda's class. We got home, went out in the backyard. I said, you owe me 20 minutes. What am I supposed to do? I cut a telephone pole up last week, roll it from side to side of the yard. I'm not going to do it. You don't have to do it. You're right, I can't make you do it. At dark, the coyotes come out. I sat on the porch. He started rolling the pole. And I couldn't make him do anything, but I said, hey, clean your room. You can't make me clean. You're right. I can't make you clean your room. But you don't go to scouts. You don't go to ball practice. You don't go to anybody's birthday party. You don't go swim until the room's clean. I didn't tell him that then. I said, hey, clean your room. You can't make me clean. You're right. I can't make clean room. Hey, Mr. Lonnie, I've been invited to go. You can go as soon as you clean your room. Hey, Mr. Lonnie, the Avenger movie is on. You can watch it as soon as you clean your room. Hey, they asked me to go to this thing at church. It starts at 4. You can go as soon as you clean your room. Now, if I walk this kid into his room and I go, you must pick it up, fold it, put it here, put it there. Who's cleaning his room, me or him? I can't make him do anything. I can make him reevaluate his choices. When my behavior costs me more than it costs you, I'll reevaluate my behavior. I can influence what happens to me. Now, we talked about that quite a bit, but the next thing we need to talk about is in the significant 7, we basically have 4 skills. Now, this is where you probably just need to get a copy because I got to go through these pretty fast. But the 4 skills, number 1, are intrapersonal skills. Number 2 is interpersonal skills. Number 3 is systemic skills. And number 4 is judgmental skills. Now, it's interesting that when we talk about this, and this is an old theory. I mean, I wrote this book about youth ministry in the late 90s. I went into private practice in 98. So I probably wrote this treatise I did using the Stephen Glenn stuff at least in 97 or 98. I want to read you the modern version of this. This is called emotional intelligence. And this is modern stuff. This is, the last 5 years. And I normally like to take stuff and kind of regurgitate it my own way, but he does such a good job with this. I'm just going to read the way he wrote it. This is Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. And so, Lonnie, why are you talking about so much emotion with your kids? 1 Thessalonians 4, this is God's will and your sanctification, that each one of you know how to possess his own vessel, not in passionate lust like the Gentiles. Now, we typically read that and we think about that's just sexuality. No, he's saying you don't let your passions, you don't let your emotions drive your chariot. You learn to control your own chariot and don't let your emotions drive you. It's not having the emotions, but how I respond to the emotions. This is emotional intelligence. Number 1 is emotional insight. The ability to label and know your own emotions. Recognize a feeling as it happens, psychological insight and self-awareness. This is understanding that my emotions are information, not instruction. If you don't know the difference between that, you're a slave of your feelings. Because if you only act the way you feel, you will always act badly when you feel bad. Okay? I've got about an hour and a half drive tonight. When I get in the tactical Toyota, I'll call Jackie and say, I'm on my way home. I'm 61 years old. I can't drive from here to Huntsville and not stop. Just saying, you know what I mean, right? And so I'll stop and I'll call Jackie. Hey, I had to get out of the truck, go to the men's room. 35 minutes later, I get back in the truck. I call Jackie. I'm back in the truck. What took you so long? Well, there's a sign in the men's room that said clean restrooms. So I had to find a mop and a bucket and some water and some rubber gloves. And she said, no. The sign doesn't tell you to clean the restrooms. The sign tells you the restrooms are clean. Understanding your emotions tell you something. They don't tell you to do anything. So emotional insight. Number 2, once I have an emotion, I participate in what's known as self-regulation. I want each of you to possess his own vessel. This is managing your emotions, handling your own feelings so they are appropriate is the ability that builds on self-awareness. This includes self-soothing. I'm upset. I calm myself down. Shaking off rampant anxiety, a plague and a pandemic in this modern generation. Shaking off gloom, irritability, and the consequences of failure. Those who are poor at this skill are constantly battling feelings of distress. You look at your young people and they're constantly sad, constantly distressed, constantly depressed, is because they can't do self-regulation. They can't manage their emotions. And by the way, I know I was very popular when I said the things I said about the phone today. If your kid was allergic to peanuts, would you let there be peanuts in your house? If your kid was allergic to peanuts, could they go play at their friend's house who are going to have peanut clusters? That would be a negative. If your child gets involved in the internet and social media and it affects their mood, their happiness, or their productivity, they are allergic to the internet and treat it as a toxic allergy. Well, everybody else can eat peanuts. Well, you can't. It'll kill you. Well, everybody else has a cell phone. You don't use yours properly. It's killing you. Don't be afraid to say, hey, this is something you may have to mature into. You have an aberrant reaction to social media. It doesn't need to be in your house. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to make that decision, okay? After you manage your emotions, self-regulation, it's motivating yourself. This is where we talk about the I'm capable and I'm significant. Marshaling your emotions in the pursuit of a goal is essential for paying attention, for self-motivation, for mastery and creativity. Emotional self-control has two factors: delay gratification and stifling impulsiveness. If you can't delay gratification and you can't stop your impulsiveness, you're never going to be successful, because those underlie accomplishment of every sort. Read Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. Read books about people who don't have the ability to stay with a task. Now, people who can't do these things are probably mentally ill, have personality disorders. People who don't do these things are immature, not properly disciplined, or not being trained. And that's the difference between true mental illness and maladaptive behavior. Number 4, once I have emotional insight, once I can self-regulate, once I can motivate myself, I recognize emotions in other people. Empathy, another ability that builds on emotional self-awareness, is the fundamental people skill. People who are empathetic can translate and are more attuned to subtle social cues that indicate what others need or want. If I understand my emotions, I can walk into a room and recognize those emotions in you. This person's sad, mad, happy, glad, and I can attune to that. If I felt that way, how would I want to be treated? And it teaches kids to quit being selfish and not be egocentric. And the ability to relate to other people, if you don't have that ability, we call that a mirror neuron deficit. But if you have that ability, it allows you to have a social skill where you can respond to the needs of others and to the likes and wants of others without being manipulated. And then once you have emotional insight, self-regulation, motivation, and recognize emotions in others, then you can manage relationships. The skill of managing relationships is managing emotions in other people. This is the tipping point between social competence and social incompetence. These abilities undergird popularity, leadership, and interpersonal effectiveness. These two theories are 40 years apart, but they're basically the same theory. So when we explore the significant 7, keep those definitions in mind. When you look at the significant 7, number 1 is the ability to understand personal emotions and use that understanding to develop self-discipline, self-control, and learn from experience. Sound like emotional intelligence, doesn't it? That's intrapersonal skills. I understand my own emotions, and I use the understanding of my emotions for self-discipline, self-regulation, delayed gratification, and motivation. Sound like the same theory to me. And then we have self-control, and then I can learn from experience. I treated people this way, it didn't work out well. I didn't do my homework, it didn't work out well. I can take the things I learned from experience and move on. So those are intrapersonal skills. And then you have interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills allow the individual to work with others and develop friendships through communication, cooperation, negotiation, sharing, empathizing, and listening. That does not take place on social media. It takes place out in the playground. It takes place in unsupervised play. It takes place in going on camping trips. It takes place in, hey, go ride your bike, come home when the street lights are on. Children who grew up in a play-based childhood learn to be anti-fragile. Children who don't. And so learning how to deal with the me that's me, and once I get a good balance of dealing with the me that's me, I learn how to deal with the you that's you. And then since there's you and there's me, then there's systemic skills. That means there's more of you than there are of me. And systemic skills give us the ability to respond to limits and consequences of everyday life with responsibility, adaptability, flexibility, and integrity. You're not always going to make the team. You're not always going to be the starting pitcher. Your artwork doesn't always end up on the refrigerator. Life's hard. Life's a contact sport. Sometimes there's somebody better than you. Sometimes somebody gets something you didn't get. Sometimes families have things that we don't have, and I learned to live in a system. This is the way school works. This is the way church works. This is the way family works. This is the way community works. This is the way a team works. And learning to deal with that is the systemic skills. Remember the fourth thing in emotional intelligence, handling relationships? And then the last one is the judgmental skills. Judgmental skills is the ability to use wisdom to evaluate situations according to appropriate values. One of the biggest mistakes we've made in religious education is we've taught rules to children, not values. Children need values, not rules. If you want to teach modesty to your daughters, just teach purity. Can you be pure and wear this? You want to talk about controlling your temper to young boys? Let's just talk about self-control. Are you going to let somebody else dictate how you act? No. Then no matter what other people's words only have the power you give them. I won't let you pick my favorite food. I won't let you pick my football team, but I'm going to let you pick my self-esteem. I'm going to let you pick whether I'm mad or glad today. Learning how to work with a system, then I use wisdom and evaluate situations according to the values, not rules, but values. Does that make sense? Interestingly enough, this is the list, and it sounds really similar to this book by Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence. You have self-discipline, self-control, communication, cooperation, negotiation, sharing, empathizing, listening, responsibility, adaptability, flexibility, integrity, wisdom, and appropriate values. Wow. Am I the only guy who sees the similarity between those two things? Raising spiritual children, teaching them that being pleasing to God has less to do with the number of appearances they make in this building and less to do with the number of things they can quote and the number of Bible Bowl trophies they can win, but learning that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control means we'll memorize verses and come to church when the doors are open, because that's a value, not a rule. It's a relationship, not a ritual. It's something that happens on an everyday basis. You talk about it when you walk and when you lie down, and it's on your bracelet and on your T-shirt and on your ball cap. So that we teach children what spirituality really is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And everything that we talked about in emotional intelligence, you sum up with Jesus said, love your neighbors yourself. If you've got a good view of self, I know how to treat you. If I don't have a good view of myself, I'm either a narcissist, I'm too important, and I don't treat you well, or I think I'm too poor and I elevate you and I'm codependent. Inherent to the Christian ethic is a proper balance of who we are. That's why I spend so much time in a parenting seminar talking about helping us fertilize the idea of a healthy self-esteem. That's why in a parenting seminar in a church, we talk about how to help you as parents manage the emotions of your children and help them develop these skills, whether you want to talk about the significant 7 intrapersonal skills, interpersonal skills, systemic skills, and judgmental skills, or whether you want to talk about the emotional intelligence skills. It's all the same stuff. It's based in scripture of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and learning to control the self. And self-control is what we need to be helping our children do, whether it's teaching discipline or whether it's in limit setting or whether it's in helping people deal with their self-esteem. And then the last thing, I guess, is this leads to maturity and it leads to independence. A child who possesses those things will be safe in high school. A child who possesses those things will be safe in college. A child who possesses those things will make good decisions in the people that they date and the people that they marry and what they choose to do for a living. And then if you really want to boil it down to it's spiritual self-reliance. I grew up in a spiritual home with a spiritual subculture, and as I get away from it, I'm not leaving those values behind. I'm taking them with me, and then whether I end up in school, at work, at play, at college, or a job, or another marriage, I have those things, and I'm self-reliant spiritually. And then Paul says you are witnesses, and God also. How devoutly, justly, and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe. As you know, we exhorted, we comforted, and we urged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God. The goal for your children is for them to walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. The New Century Version says that you live good lives for God, who calls you into his glorious kingdom. That you walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own glory kingdom. That you live good lives for God, who calls you into his glorious kingdom, to live in a way that would honor God. And that's after they leave home. That's after they start their own families. That's our goal. And then one of my favorite verses as a youth minister was 3 John 4. And John told his audience, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in the truth. Your kid's not an A student. Your kid's not a B student. Your kid's not a football player, soccer player, basketball player. They're God's student. And they make A's, B's, or C's. And they play ball or they don't. They play an instrument or they paint. But their image of who they are is not in an academic letter on a grade. And it's not in some title we give them in a sports thing. These are God's children. Spiritual self-identity creates spiritual self-reliance. And if I draw or paint or run or dribble or shoot or play, I do that as a manifestation of my relationship with God. And if I talk about it when I'm lying down and when I rise up and when I walk in the way, and it's on my bracelet and on my t-shirt, it's on my ball cap, then it'll be on their jersey. It'll be on their cleats. It'll be on their locker. It'll be the way they treat other people. Hey, is your kid a success? I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in the truth. I don't care what your grades are if you walk in the truth. I don't care if you play or don't play, as long as you walk in the truth. I don't care if you make $1 million or live under a bridge. If you walk in the truth, you're a success as a person. I'm a success as a parent. Spiritual self-reliance is about teaching children to be Christians, to be independent of us after we've gone the way of all the earth and they don't lose their souls. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your patience. I know that's a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, and I appreciate your indulgence. I would solicit that you listen to my podcast, Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Comes out every Tuesday morning. We talk a lot about this stuff. Some things about self-esteem, some things about trauma. Usually it's a story with an application, but if it's a parenting tool that we often use. There's 52 episodes called the Dad Files. It's about raising my daughter, and would love for you to listen to that. But as we close tonight, as we did this morning, I have no greater joy than hearing my children walk in the truth. As a parent, as a grandparent, as an adult, as a teenager, as a child who's old enough to know right or wrong, are you walking the truth? Man, that's a yes or no question. You either are living compliant to God's wishes for you, you're being a good child of God, or you're not. And if you're not, we'd like to encourage you. We'd like to pray with you. We'd like to pray for you. If you're not a Christian, we'd like to baptize you so that you can be in a relationship with your Heavenly Father, because it really doesn't matter what else is going on in your life. If your relationship with your Father in heaven is not right, all of your other relationships are going to be compromised or suspect. And we'd like to think that we could help you do that. Hope that the things we've talked about have not only been biblical but practical. But at this point, we want to ask you about your relationship with your Father. And if we can help you with that, we ask you to come forward while we stand and while we sing.